Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Dr. Ryan Cragun. He's the co-author, along with Jesse Smith, of Goodbye Religion. It's a fantastic book. You should definitely check it out. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about when the U.S. will become majority non-religious. Ryan thinks it's pretty soon. We'll also talk about what are factors that push people out of the church and pull people away from church. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Well, it's interesting. I just, David Boyce. Mm-hmm. He's got a podcast channel called 52 Churches in 52 Weeks.
Oh. Okay.
One of the interesting things about him is basically he was Lutheran, had a faith crisis, had this idea. He didn't want to become not religious, even though he didn't like his Lutheran church. But he's just like, I'm just going to go visit a bunch of different churches. And so we talked about, I guess there are certain churches, and I can't do this justice like David can, but they would talk about movies like Star Wars or Barbie or, any big blockbuster movie, and they would talk about it. And
probably Unitarians or something. Yeah.
Well, it sounded like it was like a mega church or something, and they would do it in the summer to drive attendance, to get people who aren't normally interested in church to come. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that approach?
So I talk about this in my classes, and I'll talk about, like, I got a flyer in the mail that I love to show my classes. One of the ways that we as sociologists think about religion, particularly in the U.S., it works in any country where you have freedom of religion. So you have effectively a religious marketplace. And that's the idea, is we think about religion as a marketplace where if you have the freedom to choose which religion you want to go to, that effectively turns religions into competitors.
Right.
So now religions have to decide, how are we going to adjust to better position ourselves in the marketplace?
You sound like an economist.
I know, and it's really weird because I'm not, but like this is one aspect where I actually agree with them. Religions do compete, and that includes the LDS Church, right? They're competing in certain ways. So the mega churches are probably the best example of this because they're not just competing with other religions, which they absolutely are. They're also competing with the NFL. They're competing, right? Like they are. They're competing with all of the other recreational things you can do at the same time that you would be going to church. So what has that led them to do? They're building effectively stadiums with mega screens and pop bands, right? And really exciting things. And this gets to the flyer that I show my students. So when I talk about this, I show like religions are constantly changing and evolving to try and better fit the marketplace and pull people in. I got a flyer. I think they just sent it to everybody in my neighborhood, right? But on the flyer, it's got my name, and it's like, I think the name of the church is Fellowship Church. It's not even like Christ Fellowship Church. It's like Fellowship Church. There's no reference to Jesus on the flyer. There's no reference to God, no reference to religion. And then it says Easter, right? So it's like Easter egg hunt. Bring the family, free family photos. Right? Okay, like that. Where is the religious message in there? There's no religious message. And then after that, it was kids
Easter.
party.
You could argue Easter is
right, but they said Easter egg hunt, right? And it's not like the Easter bunny is Christian, right? Like, come on, those are all pagan symbols, right? Let's be clear about that. So there's Easter egg hunt and family photos, free. All of that's free. Below that is family, like a kids party, and then the last one was all you can eat barbecue, and these were different dates, right? And I show that to my students. I say, where's the religion in that? Right? And all I'm doing is illustrating this religious marketplace idea. What are they doing? They're trying to appeal to people in the community to say, hey, we've got an all-you-can-eat barbecue. Now, I wouldn't go because I watch my weight very carefully, right? I'm pretty meticulous about this. So that's not a super appealing thing
Easter
to me.
No Easter candy for you?
No, I've got to be careful, right? But are there a lot of people who'd be like, all-you-can-eat barbecue? Like, I'll go for that, right? And then there's a religious message on top of it.
Family photos for free?
Family photos for free. Easter egg hunt for the kids, right? They're trying to pull people in. And I get it. Like, it's not bad marketing and it's not bad ways to kind of like pull people in. But what is it they're really doing? They're competing in a religious marketplace. They're trying to position themselves in such a fashion. They're like, hey, if you come to our church, it's going to be fun, right? And a lot of religions are doing this. Even kind of our older religions, they'll now have a traditional service at 9 a.m. and a contemporary service at 11 a.m., right? The LDS Church is not there yet. But how long until they start doing stuff like that?
I will tell you. They're coming out with a new hymn book. And I'm like, even today, I was like, this sounds like a Community of Christ hymn.
See?
This sounds like a Protestant hymn. These are definitely very different. Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
They're competing in a religious marketplace. I know you could make the argument like the drop from 3 hours to 2 hours had all sorts of other, logistical reasons. Really? Who are they competing with, right? Do people really want to go to church for 3 hours on Sunday?
If you're a polygamist, you can go for 5.
Now, I have been to a Pentecostal church that I was there for 6 hours and it was still going strong.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Because when the Spirit comes, you just go until the Spirit leaves,
Okay.
right? So there are places that still have the Mormons beat on this, right? But what really drove that transition, right? For me, kind of the more cynical sociologist, as I look at these changes, I'm like, yeah, that was not a logistics thing, right? That was 100%. They're competing in a marketplace and they're losing people who are like, I don't have 3 hours on Sunday. I'm not going to spend that much time. I want a 2-hour church service. That's it. That's it.
I will tell you, I was invited to go to basically a nursing home to help with the service. 30-minute church.
Right?
I was really surprised.
Yeah. And I don't know how long it'll be.
They also said that Sunday school was on Wednesday, and I'm like, isn't that Wednesday school?
That's a good one. I like that. We'll see if they keep shrinking that, right? Is it going to eventually get down to an hour? Because that's where Catholics are. It's an hour service, right? Lots of religions, it's an hour service. Now, they're still demanding more, and there is a benefit to demanding more, right? So the more demanding religions are less likely to lose members right now. So there's like this tricky balancing act of where you want to fall. But look, like you're competing with the NFL, you're competing with the slopes, you're competing during the summer with water skiing and hiking, right? Like that's actually movies. You're competing with shopping, you're competing with brunch, you're competing with all of those things. It's not just the other churches. You're competing with all of that. And if you don't position yourself well in the marketplace, you're not going to win, right? You're going to hemorrhage members. They have to adjust, right? The world is constantly changing. Religions have to change with that. If they don't, they will die. That's just the reality of it.
So another thing that I found very striking, well, and I'm pretty sure you must have written it because it was a statistics reference.
It's possible.
And we may have to give a slight statistics lesson here. But you were talking about how church attendance is like an S curve. And so I was thinking back to my survival analysis class because we use this class. These are logistic regression curves. And I don't want to blow people away with statistics,
right.
But can you describe what an S curve is and what you were using with that? Because it's not like a total S.
No.
It's a
So it could be a gradual one. So an S-shaped curve is true for a lot of innovations. So I'll use a different one and then we'll come back to religion. Because I think in the context I was talking about was like what's going to happen with people leaving religion.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you can think about it. I don't know how old your listeners are. We'll try this. But
they're all over the place.
They're all over the place.
Probably older.
Oh, older. Then we'll use DVDs and then we'll switch to iPhones.
Okay.
So if they're old enough to remember DVDs, right? Or CDs even, right? Either one of those. We'll start with DVDs. A lot of us had VHS tapes, right? VHS players. And then DVDs come on the scene. And I still remember the first time I saw one of those, I was at my friend Nate Williams' house in Mountain Green, right? And he had one, and we took it outside and we were using it as like a Frisbee.
Oh, no.
Just terrible, right? Like we never should have. I think his dad was pissed about that. I think we scratched it, right? But I still remember, like, this is a super cool disc. You don't have to rewind them.
Right.
Right?
Like kind rewind.
Yeah, exactly. All of the benefits from that DVD were just like immediately clear. They were obvious. But how innovations get adopted is you have your early adopters, right? So the people who are right at the base of that S curve. So as it's beginning to make the S. So the early adopters tend to be young, white men, highly educated and affluent, right? They have the money, the resources, they're kind of connected into what's going on. They see the new technology, they have the resources to try it, right? Sometimes they don't work, but they're the ones trying it. They're the early adopters. And so what you'll see is like initially it's the really weird ones, right? Like they're really out there, but like then it picks up. And so you start to get a number that pick up and they're like adopting these technologies. And then it hits a sharper upward slope, right? And there's an inflection point. So that inflection point is where you start to hit the sharp upward curve. And it's somewhere around 20% of adoption. The same holds for DVDs, right? iPhones or smartphones, right? Electric cars. We may be there with that. Like, no, we're not there yet. We're still at like 12% or something like that. Maybe even lower than that. Yeah. But when we hit 20%, there may be that sharp upward tick where then the adoption just goes super rapid, right? And what is interesting is it's like 20 to 30% is when that hits and then it takes off. And then it'll shoot through the next 40 to 50%. And then it levels off at around 85%. You always have some people who kind of never really are the adopters, right?
The Luddites.
The Luddites, right? I actually said this the other day in one of my classes. I was like, yeah, this happened with DVDs. Do any of you remember DVDs? And they're all like 18, 20, right? So they're like, we just download stuff now. And one of them was like, my grandma still has VHS tapes. I love VHS. And I was like, oh, this is so retro. I don't understand. Like, why would you go back to VHS? It was terrible, right? It's 720p.
Well, people
like,
are
it's
buying
awful.
records now.
I know.
There's record players.
It makes no sense.
I was like, I saw one in the store just recently.
Yes.
And I was like, what?
No, I don't get it. But that's the idea of the S-shaped curve, right? Is early adoption, it's early adopters, it's really slow, and then it slowly picks up, hits an inflection point, shoots up rapidly, and then there's a slow tapering off at the end, and it makes an S curve. So the context in the book, as I was saying, there's a possibility. And this is where it's like the last chapter, I think. So we've actually jumped to the last chapter, but that's fine. Where we're projecting people leaving religion or people being non-religious into the future. And we only go to 2040. We're being pretty safe here, right? It's 2024, almost 2025, probably when people hear this. So we only go out like 15 years. Same with Pew. Pew did the same thing. They projected out about 15 years. So we're not projecting infinitely into the future, but we project out to 2040 and it shows growth. The non-religious are going to continue to grow. But I think in that context, what I said is this is kind of like straight line growth. This is like basic regression models. There is the possibility that non-religion is more like an innovation, like DVDs. And we're going to see an inflection point where suddenly this just takes off. And the vast majority of people are going to be non-religious. And then we'll get to that top edge, where it curves again. And there will still be people who are religious for a long time, but they're going to be the minority. I've taken to calling them the remnant, right? Like, who are the people who are going to stay? And actually, quick shout out to a friend of mine, Stephen Bullivant in the UK. That's actually who he's studying now. So the UK has crossed the 50% mark. More than 50% in the UK are not religious. They have no religious affiliation. Attendance numbers are abysmal, right? Like, religions are not doing well in the UK. He has taken to studying super devout Catholics to try and figure out, like, who are these people who in the face of massive secularization are like, this is my thing. This is what matters to me, and I'm staying. So he's actually studying kind of the remnant, right, if you want to call him that. But we're still studying because we're not at the 50%, right? We're at 30, 32%, depends on the study, right? That's about where we are. It could go up really quickly, could level off. We don't really know what's going to happen, but that was the context of the F-shaped curve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I know in our interview last year, you had mentioned that you gave a presentation with the LDS Church.
I did. Yeah.
And I was pretty surprised to hear that.
I'm still surprised it happened.
But I remember reading that chapter and being like, isn't this terrifying to church leaders?
Yeah. I'm sure it is. I mean, if I were on that side, I would absolutely be terrified. Now, that said, right, I was actually, this is another thing I was thinking about on the way over. I was like, I wonder if this will come up. If I was in the upper leadership of the LDS Church,
right,
I would give every one of them, this is a shout out for my book, right? But I'd give them every one of them a copy of the book because we talk about the theoretical, like our theoretical framework is these push-pull factors, right? They can't control the pull. They have some say over the push. Okay. And we can get into that if you want to talk about it. So let's talk about the push-pull framework.
Yes.
So that's what I was saying is like they should read it because then they could maybe start thinking about the push factors.
Well, is that why we're having Protestant hymns in our new hymn book?
Yes. 100%. This is what's going on. So the framework.
So wait a minute.
Yeah.
Are we just making Mormons more Protestant? Is that going to, and that's going to slow the growth of the nuns?
No.
It won't
I don't think it's going to stop.
So why change then if it's not going to stop?
They're doing everything they can to minimize the push, right? Okay. So we'll talk about the push.
Let's go into push-pull for sure.
So on the push-pull framework, we stole this from demographers who use this when talking about immigration. Okay. So whenever somebody's migrating to a country, they're obviously leaving a country. The factors that are pushing them out of that country, we call push factors. So this could be like lower levels of socioeconomic development, maybe war, famine. There could be, all sorts of things going on that's pushing them out of the country. That's like, I don't want to stay here. And then on the other side, it's where they're going. Those countries have what are called pull factors. So they're pulling people because maybe they have jobs, maybe they have a better standard of living, maybe they have better healthcare, maybe they have a better developed social safety net. Those are the things that are pulling migrants to those countries, okay? And we're obviously not trying to be political about this. This is just the standard framework that we use to understand immigration. We apply that exact same framework to people leaving religion. And what makes it somewhat novel is people have used like the push factors before. So people have talked about like, oh, people are leaving because they don't like this about religion. But very few people have talked about the pull factors of a life without religion, and that's a pretty novel approach. And so we're using that framework. So we talk about this in that context, and we describe a number of push factors.
There's a lot of NFL pull.
There is. The NFL certainly, and that is actually one of them, right? Yeah. So as a push factor, we have like a hypocrisy. Broadly speaking, we would call it value misalignment, right? Religions are teaching things that I don't agree with. So there's like the political stuff, there's the hypocrisy, there are the doctrines. All of those are push factors that are pushing people out of religion. Okay. And it could be that, they're a young person who have gay or lesbian friends and their religion is not accepting of that. And so they're like, this just doesn't work for me. It's pushing me out. On the pull side, there are a number of factors that we describe as well. So one of them is just like a secular worldview. There's the better things to do, which we talked about, right?
Yeah.
So there are things
apparently ticks off the lazy learners.
Yes, I get it, right? But it's true, right? Like they do have better things to do. So and then there's also the autonomy, right? Like now I get to make my own decisions about what I believe, my ethics, my values, my morals, and what I'm going to do with my time, how I'm going to spend my time, what I want to do with all those things. We can get into like the consequences. We'll probably get to that at the very end, right? But that's the framework that we're using is the push. What is pushing people out? And religions have some role in that, right? And then there's the pull. So what is pulling them towards a life without religion? And this is the context in which we brought up, like, what would the church do, right? Well, the church really doesn't have a lot of control over the pull factors, okay? Because that's all stuff that's like the appeal of not being religious. And I get sometimes they try and make that look really bad, right? If you leave religion, you're going to end up a drunk in a gutter somewhere dead, right? No, you're not. You'll be fine. Yes, you're going to be fine, right? But that
hanging out with prostitutes, yes, and you're going to get some disease.
You know all of this. Like this is so. It's that rhetoric that they use of like life is miserable without religion. Everything will be terrible. Turns out this is not true, right? And all it takes is like watching TV now to realize that, right? It's pretty easy to see life without religion is fine. So they don't really have a lot of control over that other than trying to depict it in a certain way. But what about the push factors, right? So that value misalignment is a push factor where maybe it's a religion that has allied itself with the Republican Party or is, pro-Trump. I'm not trying to be political, but some religions have done that. That can be a push factor for some people, right?
They will push people out of the church.
Right, because they don't agree with that political perspective. It's going to push them out of the church. Maybe it is their position on LGBTQ individuals, right? So that could be pushing them out of church. It could just be doctrinal things, right? So it could be we are young earth creationists, right? Luckily, the church is not in that camp, but it could be very specific doctrinal things. I'm actually working on a book on Mormons and science right now, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah. Another interview.
I know. We'll get there. We've got another year or two before that comes out. But
you can come on anytime.
I appreciate it. It's very kind of you. But one of the things that's really interesting, particularly about the LDS Church, right? No official position on evolution. So that's
officially.
Like, officially.
Unofficially,
yes. The vast majority kind of reject it, right? But then you get into like the nuanced takes on, and this is always interesting, on like biblical stories, right? Did Noah's Ark actually happen, right? And most people in the church would probably say yes,
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So most people would say yes. Does the church have an official position on that? Right. And so now you're getting into these areas where like, hey, if I'm a geologist, right, I'm a Mormon who's been raised in the church, I believe it, and then I go to graduate school and I'm studying geology, I'm pretty quickly going to hit that roadblock where it's like, come on.
My stake president is a geologist.
Right.
I'm going to have to ask him about Noah.
You should
now.
ask him about Noah's Ark. Is it possible to have a worldwide flood? Come on, right? Like the science on this is pretty straightforward. No, it's just completely implausible. Now, again, you can believe it as a great metaphor for like how God is going to interact with humans. All of that's fine. You just have to reconfigure your interpretation of this. But if the church is going to continue to insist that Noah's Ark and the whole flood happened, you're going to push some people out, right? So whenever you hit those blocks where it's we're teaching this and it doesn't align with what people believe, those are push factors. So this is what I said, like all of the general authorities should have a copy of the book and get, not that I care about selling copies, right? At the end of the day, it's, do they understand that some of what they're doing is pushing people out?
Have you sent them one yet?
No.
Or 12 yet? 15?
15. It would be 15 copies, right? Got to get all 15. But that's the idea. They should understand the push. And I think they probably do, right? I think we talked about this last time. They have a whole bunch of social scientists who work for the church. Mm-hmm. They attend the SSR meetings. They go to the MSSA meetings. Mm-hmm. They know me. I know them, right? It's not like we're completely disconnected. They're probably aware of all
I heard
this.
one of them even invited you.
I know, crazily. I don't understand that. But yeah, that's the idea. So how much control do they have over the push factors? Now, at some level, the hypocrisy thing, like they're never going to be able to control that, right? Unless, can you imagine, right? Unless they finally come out and say, there are members of the church who are just not good people, right? And being a Mormon doesn't make you a good person, which is just true, right? Like that is true. You probably know some members of the church who are not nice people, right? There are non-religious people who are not nice people. There are Catholics who are not nice people. There are Muslims who are not nice people. Like it's true of every group. Is the church willing to say that, right? Because at the end of the day, they have to defend the hypocrisy at some level. They have to say, well, like, oh, that's not like, they're not representative of our church, right? That's not what we really teach. Yeah, but at some level, they are members of your church, right? And they may even be leaders in the church. Because have there ever been leaders who have done bad things?
There have been.
There have been. There have been a few, right? And sometimes they pop up anew, right? Doing new things that you're like, oh. And they're the ones who are telling everybody else, you should be doing this, 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 and this. And on the side, what are they doing, right? They've got a child porn addiction or something like that. Like that stuff happens, okay? How does the church address that?
We hide it.
That's a very good response, right? You can't do that, right? Because as soon as you hide that and you try and cover it up, what you're really saying is like, no. All the good ones, right? We claim them.
Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain.
And you can't do that, right? You have to own it. But the only way you can own that is by saying, well, maybe being a member of the church isn't going to make you a good person. Maybe that's work you have to do on your own, and we can help. This is
going to be a hard message for church leaders to accept.
Right. But do you see what I'm saying? Like it's fundamentally always going to be a push factor.
I don't see the Pope saying this. I don't see Billy Graham saying this, or I don't see anybody doing this.
And all of them are losing members. Do you see what I'm saying? Like at some level, they're just not owning the fact that religion doesn't make you a better person. It just doesn't, right? You can be an amazing person. I'll give an example. The founder of Doctors Without Borders, atheist. Is anybody going to trash Doctors Without Borders, right? Like they're literally flying into like war zones and trying to perform surgeries on people. They're doing great things. No one's going to be critical of Doctors Without Borders. It was founded by a non-religious person, okay? There are non-religious people who are doing amazing things. Religion doesn't make you good. Non-religion doesn't make you bad, right? So
that's not a very good selling process. Going back to the marketplace of ideas.
I know. I get it, right? But how do you solve the hypocrisy question then? Because anybody who's sitting in church, right? And we've got tons of examples of this in the book, right? Lots of people who are like, I was in church and then I would like talk to members and I would see what they were doing in church and how they were behaving in church. They were like really righteous and holy. And then as soon as we would leave church, I saw them having affairs and I saw them doing all of these awful things, right? How do you solve that? Or is there no solution, right? And that may be true that it's like, well, we just can't ever own that, right? So we're just going to say religion does make you a better person. except for those people.
Exactly. I think that's the easier solution.
It is an easier solution, but
yeah, that was
it's
the
not
wolf in
working.
sheep's clothing.
Yeah, that's right. We don't claim them, right? And then you just commit the no true Scotsman fallacy. Well, they were never a true Mormon, right?
Exactly.
They were, yeah. But like, this is what's happening, right? Lots of people are seeing the hypocrisy and saying, well, look, even if the leaders who are trying to tell me how to be righteous are not righteous, what good is this religion? They're shooting themselves in the foot. Like, there's no way that you can argue that they're not doing that, right? By holding themselves up and saying, we are a beacon of righteousness in this world. And then you turn around and you're like, oh, no, you're not, right? Like, look at that guy, look at that guy, look at all of these people doing awful things. You're not, right? Now, could you say, we can help you deal with some of these issues. We can help you deal with like a loneliness thing or a sense of purpose or meaning in life. They can do those things. But just being a member of the LDS Church, is that going to make you an ethical person? Come on, Ryan, what's the answer to that?
The church answer is yes, it is.
And your answer is?
Well, it depends. It depends on whether you're a good person or not. But I mean, let's talk about that for a minute, because we do see people trying to decide if I can say this. I think I can say this. Richard Dutcher.
Okay.
The guy who wrote God's Army,
Yep.
States of Grace, like, he's an amazing filmmaker, the father of Mormon cinema.
Indeed.
He said this publicly, so I feel like I can say it publicly. I'm not sharing anything I shouldn't share. In fact, he even filmed it, so I feel even better. You know, he left the church, basically had a faith crisis, started getting drunk, being promiscuous, all the things, you know. So when you look at the church position of, if you don't have the church in your life, you're going to fall into a gutter drunk, which is basically what Richard Dutcher did. He posted an announcement on Facebook a few months ago, said, I have a major announcement. We're going to meet at this place in Salt Lake. And I was like, is he going to finally make that Joseph Smith movie? I'm going to go.
Okay.
And that was not the announcement. The announcement was, he said, somebody was going to blackmail me that I was going to do these terrible things that I've done. And I was like, I'm just going to admit that I did them. And
Okay.
I'm starting I'm trying to remember how he said that, a new non-church.
All right. Yeah.
It's called The Way.
Sure.
And basically, he attended Sean McCraney's church, who's a former Mormon, became an evangelical. He did drugs and alcohol and everything too. And Richard said he showed up in Sean's church and he stumbled in because he was drunk.
All right.
And he had a spiritual experience. But basically, he wants to create an organization, a secular organization that doesn't really have a building, and it's called The Way Station. It's called The Way Station.
Okay, that's better than The
W-A-Y.
Way, because that's very like Buddhist Zen. And I'm just like, dude,
Okay. But in a way, it's kind of like that. But basically, he's like, you can come for a few weeks. It's basically, because he misses, one of the things that he missed with the LDS Church was the fellowship.
Sure, the community.
And so the idea here is, we're not going to preach to you, but we are going to have fellowship, because he valued that.
Yeah.
And so that's what the announcement was. And I'm sure it appeals to some people. Didn't appeal to me.
Nope.
So I left. I really wanted him to make that Joseph Smith movie.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
And he said, if anybody has a few $1 million, I'll still make it. So any rich people out there,
Richard
Dutcher's
he
available.
Said he'll do it. Yeah.
So anyway, my point in bringing this up is, because it kind of did fit into this church
The classic narrative.
About,
Yep.
hey, you're going to fall down drunk. And he literally did.
Yep.
Like, maybe not in a gutter, but he did bad things. He admitted to bad things.
Sure.
He's kind of turning his life around. He's trying to be a good person. I don't even want to say Christian, because I don't even think he believes in God anymore.
Right.
Maybe he does. I wasn't totally clear on that. But he did follow the church narrative. And so, can you talk about people maybe in Richard Dutcher's position where maybe we would call them spiritual but not religious.
Sure.
How many of these people who are leaving religion like Richard did, doing what Richard did versus I'm going to go become a Seattle Seahawks fan or in the NFL, or I'm going to go bike riding, or I'm going to go running, or I'm going to go spend time in nature. Right. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that we have definitive statistics on what percentage does what. I think it's probably safe to say, particularly for those who have the hard break, the ones who drift out, and this is always tricky. It's like tangent upon tangent upon tangent. Sorry, this is fitting for the podcast.
You're in the right place.
It's really tricky. There are a lot of people who are in the church right now who are drinking alcohol. And smoking, well, maybe not smoking, it's kind of dying out, but drinking coffee, vaping, right? Using medical marijuana or just marijuana, right? That are members of the church who are watching R-rated movies, who are masturbating, who are watching porn, right? Like, they are members of the church doing this, right? Now, many of them are probably going to be the drifters who just drift right out and continue to do those things because their life is largely fine as it is now, and it will continue to be there.
They're not drug addicts.
Yeah, right? They're just like, this is how they recreate, and that's fine. There are, so that was the first tangent, right? There are a large group of people, I think, who make the hard break, and then as part of that hard break, they're like, wow, I've not done all of those things my whole life. I've got to go try some of those things. I think most of them, don't have hard numbers on this, right? But I think most of them try it, and are like, okay, didn't work for me, right? Some of them, your Richard Dutchers, are like, wow, alcohol's cool, right? I can lose myself in this, right? And it makes me feel good for a while, and then I feel terrible. But I get it, right? So there's some appeal to trying the things that you didn't get to do because they were all restricted under the LDS Church. I would guess that the vast majority of them try it. Maybe they become social drinkers, but most of them are just whatever. I didn't get to do it, now I've done it, and it doesn't matter to me. There's going to be a small subset of them who do what Richard Dutcher does, right? Which is they become addicted to alcohol, or they become addicted to drugs or something like that. That's going to be true. But there are members of the church who are addicted to alcohol and drugs, right? Again, the church is a little bit protective in that sense, but not wholly protective. Whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter for your ability to live a healthy life, right? And we can come back to that. So yeah, this can happen. To get to the bigger question about are there people who are looking for this community and meaning and all of that after they leave? 100%. And some would call them SBNRs, spiritual but not religious. I don't love that term, right? Because we don't really know what spirituality means. Everybody has a different definition of that. But I think there are a subset of people that once they leave religion, they're trying to find a community. They're trying to find a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. I think, and at some level, those things are important. It's always tricky. I immediately then jump to Scandinavian countries. I'm not saying that we should be Scandinavia. No, I'm not saying
Isn't
that, right?
Scandinavia utopia? They've got universal health care.
I know. It's kind of amazing. I mean, to be in Norway, they do. They have really good things. But the reason I bring it up is the vast majority of people in those countries, actually still a lot of them will identify as members of the state church, right? But nobody goes. And most of them don't believe. They still find community, right? They find community through the hiking clubs, through biking clubs, through football teams, through FUTBOL, right? Football teams, not FOOTBAL, not gridiron football. So, they're still finding community. They're finding a way to connect in all of those things. It's totally possible to do that. Religion is not necessary for that in society. It's not like Norway is collapsing because religion's collapsing, or Sweden, or Finland, or Denmark, right?
But they're socialists.
I know, but they're fine, right? They're doing fine. And the people are fine. The big kind of asterisk that I like to put on this is this whole idea of meaning, right? There's a lot of emphasis. They're people need a purpose in life. People need meaning. Again, I'm a social scientist. I'm very empirical. I'm data-driven. If you actually look at people who have meaning versus people who don't have meaning, and look at long-term consequences, or how happy they are in life, or how educated they are, or how successful they are, there's really no relationship, right? Meaning, and I'm not trying to say you don't need to have any meaning, have meaning or don't have meaning. I don't really care. The data don't bear out that meaning matters. Meaning doesn't mean anything. Right? So it's a weird finding, right? Because a lot of people think my life means something. But there are plenty of nihilists out there who are like, actually, my life doesn't mean anything, but I'm fine. And I can continue to live my life and just be fine with that, right? I think nihilism scares a lot of people, right? Really, really. My favorite is Jordan Peterson, who I think is deathly afraid of nihilism. I don't know how much you know about Jordan Peterson, and probably just pissed off a bunch of your listeners by trashing Jordan Peterson, which some of the stuff I agree with. But like, I genuinely think he is terrified of nihilism. And so he's trying to build this whole framework to help people get away from nihilism and find purpose in their life. And that's fine. But the data, the empirical data, suggests that it doesn't actually matter, right? It's not that important. So all of this comes back to like, how many are like looking for things? I think the vast majority of people aren't looking for that kind of community where they need the way, what was it? The way station. The way station, right? Or an oasis or a Sunday assembly, right? There are a bunch of different organizations like this that are basically church for non-believers, right?
Right.
They're where they show up and they sing songs and they have community and fellowship and they volunteer and they do. They're great. Like, that's great. If that's what you want, I'm glad they exist. That's wonderful. The vast majority of people who leave religion don't want that, right? They're going to find their community through friends at work or through playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? I was actually with a friend last night playing board games here. People find community. You can find community. Now I get there's like a loneliness epidemic. Some people are trying to associate that with the decline of religion. No, it's not. It's not religion's, or it's not the non-religious.
It's just Facebook's fault.
Yes, right. Blame whatever you want, but it's like not the decline of religion, right? People were lonely before, they'll be lonely again. We just need to do a better job finding community and not just digitally, right? I think that's true. We need interpersonal connection.
Right.
Whether you have that through religion or not is irrelevant.
Well, and it's funny that you say that because I remember a conversation I had with a good friend from my mission, and he lost his testimony while he was in the bishopric.
Yep. Okay.
And I remember, I hadn't contacted him. He lived up in Idaho. I was doing a game at Boise State. I was like, hey, Doug, let's get together. And he said, yeah, meet me at this bar. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Okay. And I knew that he'd kind of left the church a little bit. And as he's sitting there drinking a beer, and I was having water, I don't remember anything. One of the things that he told me that he missed, because he doesn't believe in God anymore at all, was, in the LDS church, but I think with religion in general, this sense of purpose, this sense of life, what's going to happen to me when I die.
Yeah.
And he said that he missed that certainty because he doesn't know what's going to happen, but, probably nothing is what he thinks. And I know he also misses, and I've had other ex-Mormons say this, who's going to help me move?
The nuts and bolts practicality of the LDS church, right? Which is fair. Yeah.
And so some of them have tried universal Unitarianism or Episcopal or whatever. I have friends who've done a lot of different things. Some have left religion completely. Some still want that religion in their life. But they do, because LDS has a very specific community. Yeah. And a lot of people do feel lonely after that. Could you speak to that issue? Yeah, no, I think that's fair, right? I think people do feel lonely, and one of the things that the LDS Church does well is building a community that's very supportive, right? So somebody gets sick, people take things over, they do those things. I think that's all just like fair. I think that's fair to say, and I think that the LDS Church does that well. What I think that it's going to sound awful, right? But the solution to this is for a friend like that, right? We won't get into the meaning stuff. We already kind of talked about it. But for the community, he needs to make himself a little vulnerable and build a friendship network, right? Neighbors. Does he have neighbors? Station? He doesn't need to use the way station, right? But all he needs to do is I know my next door neighbor really well, okay? And I know the neighbor on the other side fairly well. Not quite as well, but I know my neighbors, right? You know two neighbors. I know some other ones, because right? But I know some neighbors. Don't you think that most people, especially in Utah, know all of their neighbors? They know who's a member, who's not a member. Well, if you're a member. If you're not a member, then it's much harder. Exactly. Right? I agree with that. Because there is kind of a bit of a wall between the members and the non-members. And the members know who the members are because they're doing, fast offerings, they're collecting those or whatever. They know who the members are. Then they also know who the non-members are.
To what extent they are actually neighborly with their non-members is always an open question. And I don't know the answer to that. Some might be great, others might not be. In my neighborhood, right? Yeah, I know my neighbors. If I need something, I can reach out to my neighbor. If he needs something, he can reach out to me, okay? But I also have a good friendship network. I invite people over to my house. I go out and do things. I go to other people's houses, right? There's some intentionality about it that now falls on me instead of a church. So you can solve this, but it takes intention. It takes action.
You don't have a built-in community. You have to build it yourself.
Bingo. You have to build your community, okay? And maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe it would be nice if there was just like these built-in communities that we could all just have, right? And somebody would be like, well, that's religion, right? Like, yeah, sure. But maybe we need to think through like what replaces religion. I hate thinking about it that way because I don't think that religion is something that's core to who we are. I think religion came on the scene, exploited a bunch of things that are true about humans, and now is kind of fading out of the scene. We can survive perfectly fine without religion. We can build community. Do I think that the solution is a socialistic state where the government steps in and solves all of those problems for us? Not necessarily, right? Like, I don't think that's necessarily the solution.
You're not a communist?
I'm not, but I think we can build community. It's just more intention and effort on our part. And that's hard. It means work, right? But so does religion. So if your solution is, oh, I left religion and now I'm just going to isolate and play video games at home alone, yeah, you might get lonely. Like, come on. Like, this is not hard to think through. If you were spending hours a week building a community and then you give all of that up and you just stay home and watch football all day, you might be lonely. But whose fault is that?
Just dress up your face silver and then go to Raider Nation and you got lots of friends.
Then you have a community. Start tailgating, right? Find one of your interests and participate in that, right? I think that is the solution. It's not, we have to replace it with the way station, right? Maybe that'll work for some people, and that's great. If that's what works for somebody, that's great, but I don't think most people are going to need that.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Ryan Cragun. He's the co-author of Goodbye Religion, along with Jesse Smith. If you don't have this book, you should check it out. It's going to talk about why people are leaving religion. You know, in our next conversation, we're going to talk about how religious and non-religious people compare. And you won't want to miss this conversation, but it's only available to newsletter subscribers. Go to gospeltangents.com/newsletter, and I'll send you a secret link to the final part of our conversation where we're going to talk about things like this.
As they cut things, they're not offsetting them with other ways to build community. And I think that's a problem, right? I think it's what it's actually doing is making it even easier to leave the LDS church.
I agree.
Because you've got 3 hours down to 2 hours. Well, okay, now it's just 2 hours, right? Like, how much community do you really get in a 2-hour block?
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt, so check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.